All right, recording in progress. It's funny that Zoom does that now. So Dr. Carol Humphreys is with us today as our guest speaker. We're going to give her the stage to speak a little bit about her professional trajectory, how she has had the opportunity to get to the role, the position that she's in now. She's the new provost at Sofia University, so this will be particularly wonderful for the Sofia University student community to get the opportunity to hear her speak. This will be recorded and available for people as well. I had the privilege opportunity to speak with Carol a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago, and we had a wonderful conversation. It lasted a long time. We had a lot to speak about transpersonal psychology and the student body and things that we would like to see happen at Sofia University specifically. But I think that extends out into the field of transpersonal psychology and student scholarship in the field. So thanks again, Dr. Carol Humphreys, for being here today. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your trajectory. How did things come about?
Yeah, what a journey. Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm pleased to be here. As I said earlier, off a recording. I hope that I'm interesting. You suggested I be insightful. I'm calling on the others to help me with that. Exactly. It's interesting that I'm speaking to you as provost. I have to tell you that in my life professional journey, I never imagined being in administration at a university or anywhere. I always saw myself as someone more boots on, well, I saw myself as boots on the ground. I would now say that this role is also boots on the ground. It's all the way you approach it. But I will say I always was intent for many years on being a psychologist, working one-on-one, sitting with other people through their pain and their trauma and their joys as a bit of a witness to the journey that they're on. And I always thought that would be my journey, and I fought hard and long for it. And I was able to do it for a while. And then what I eventually learned was that there are many ways to make change. And sometimes there's a need, and sometimes stepping into that, opening the door. When someone offers you something and the door is opened and you say yes and you go in, it can change your whole life. And that's certainly been my experience. I've only been at Sofia since July 1st. So I'm saying this is my 57th day, I believe. And it has been pretty amazing in a lot of ways. I've talked the least to students. I have to tell you that. Thankfully, I was able to meet with Travis and a couple of other recent grad and somebody near graduation. But my intent from the start has been to integrate into the community. And for me, that means spending time getting to know faculty, staff, students, the community members, our partners. And so what I've put on my agenda every week is try and talk to 4 to 6 new people every week. And hence the reason that I met with Travis in the past. I was like, I've got to talk to a student. Where are the students? It's so strange this time of being remote, right? I'm used to being more face-to-face, and I am boots on the ground, and that I want to talk and hear what people think and what they need and get feedback on how I'm doing and how I could do better. So it has been a crazy 57 days, just to kind of give you the recent experience. And I'm pleased to be here and actually see more student faces. Thank you, thank you. And again, I never imagined being in this kind of a position and making the kinds of decisions that I'm making. So I'll take you back to, I was born on a farm. No, I wasn't. But what I will say is that I was a single mom. A very young single mom with 2 children, and no means of support. I definitely, looking back now, we were poor. At the time, I didn't imagine that we were poor because I was just putting one foot in front of the other, making sure the kids got fed. But I worked in retail, and I always knew that I wanted something more. I always knew that. I knew that my journey was not that was impacted by the decisions I had made around relationships and having children and being a single mom. It was not going to completely define me, that there was something else that I wanted to do. And so as my children were very young, I just worked sometimes 2 and 3 jobs. And, but I kept saying, I think I'm interested in psychology. I'm interested in how people think. I'm interested in what makes people tick. I'm interested in this journey we're all on. And, you know, certainly some of my family members and friends, I think, laughed or scoffed, I should say. They wouldn't quite laugh, but it was hard to imagine that the person that I was then would then end up being provost at Sofia, and before this at Humphreys, which is, you may know, is also a school in the Bay Area. So what I did as this single mom was just dream big and try to read. I was always a huge reader, so I kept reading about the human experience. I lived in this little town in Colorado called Whitewater, Colorado, a little tiny town. I was married and divorced in Colorado, and I had my 2 children. And I always tell this story. Every Tuesday, the bookmobile would drive to this town because it was too far away from a library. So every Tuesday, up comes this great big old, you know, bookmobile and some kind of old bus. And it would come about 9 in the morning. And so at about 8:30, I would head over. It was right near the post office. And I would either have both my children or I'd, you know, be able to step out and meet the bus as it arrived. We were allowed to check out 13 books. And so, as you can imagine, I checked out 13 books and every time. And generally, at least 12 of them were autobiographies. Now imagine, what does that say about me? It was something about me that wanted to know how other people live their life and how they made decisions and how they grew. And I wanted to hear their stories, their narratives, their journeys. So I would take those 13 books and I would head home and spend most of the first 3 days reading as many as possible and staying up all night and reading. And I mean, it was a bit obsessive looking back, of course, and looking back, it also tells me that clearly I was very unhappy and wanted something more out of my life. So I kept reading and reading about other people and how they made change in their own lives, and eventually divorced and moved from Colorado back to California, where I originally was raised. And of course, I had sole custody of my 2 children. And from then, as I said, it was working 2 and 3 jobs and imagining that I too could make change in my own life. I think so. Personal transformation was something I aspired to, and I tried to work in small ways on every day. But I think there was also this call to service, to serve and help and help others as they. I don't want it to sound trite, but a real genuine call about sitting with the other and how important that was for me in this process. It wasn't, I mean, it was about me first and foremost. We can't sit with others if we're not willing to sit with our own, you know, explicit, you know, curse word. And so I sat with me and worked on me. And eventually my children were old enough that I felt I could enroll in community college. And I just had a high school diploma before that, and had actually run away from home, just, you know, to be perfectly transparent here. And so I started at community college, in Cypress Community College, which is down in Orange County. And I want to make sure, Travis, we're checking the chat box. Oh, it's you saying hello to everyone. Okay, I didn't want to miss somebody's comment. So I started taking, I went to community college, and I wasn't quite sure, was it going to be psychology or English? You know, again, I love to read. I was reading lots of the big books, and I just felt like I needed to take both. So I started at community college with my general ed and also some human services classes, which was really what they had. They had a basic, you know, intro to psych, and I took that, but I also took some human services class just to find out if that was the field, and also some English classes. And I just started, you know, going on at night and on the weekends, and some daytime classes, but my children were going to school then. So I was trying to figure that all out and work. I loved community college because I'll tell you, my professors loved to teach. They were not driven by the need to do research, which often happens at a higher level, right? But they were really there at community college because they loved teaching. And my first day of classes, my very first day, first semester, I walked into an English class. It was a Friday late afternoon class. And I walked in and I'm going to say I was 20 something at the time. And I walked in and I felt much older than I was. And I looked around and I saw all these young, fresh faces of what I imagined to be the most intelligent 18-year-olds I'd ever seen. And I imagined myself not worthy. And I sat at the back of the room, was too intimidated to get closer. I had been out of school for a bit, and all of the students sat in front of me, and I just thought, oh, I don't know if I can do this. I just don't know. It was a basic English 100 class, I believe. And it was challenging to sit through the whole class. I was questioning myself the whole time. And at the end of the class, I left in tears, and not, weeping out loud, but just kind of silently streaming down my face. And it was, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I'm smart enough. I think I'm too old. I don't deserve this. Somehow they deserve that, but I didn't. You can tell I was a bit beat up emotionally and still needed to do a lot of my own work. I'm the first to admit it. But it was really, my self-confidence was so low at that point. I had just been this, single mom working at the gas station and at the learner's clothes store and trying to make ends meet. So I didn't know if I was going to return. I really questioned, am I going to come back the next day? And sure enough, the next day I had a class, Saturday morning class, and it was called Women in Careers. And the woman who was teaching it, her name was Gail Kolsky. And to this day, I thank her. I think we all have teachers, people that come into our lives that touch us deeply. And this woman was probably 5 foot on her tiptoes, and had just a tremendously amazing, I think it was a wig, I later found out, but this amazing hair and very natural style. And she had glasses, great big glasses, little tiny face, and she was just a ball of energy from the get-go. And somehow that class, she greeted us all. She just went on and on about how women have a right, they have a voice, there's careers out there that will match, that you can find where you fit best. And somehow, I don't know, I just believed her. And that class convinced me that indeed my voice was worthy. I had something to offer the field, whatever field I chose. And that in fact, the field, whatever field I chose, needed me. And it was an amazing adventure. And from then on, you couldn't stop me. And it was lots of community college classes. I took 3.5 years to complete my AA because of parenting and everything else. I could only take a couple classes every semester. And I have to say, I also took a lot of classes that interest me, and maybe I didn't necessarily need them. And then I transferred to California State, Dominguez Hills. So the reason I chose Dominguez Hills was it was near Compton. And at that time, I had just started working in the city, a city near there, doing child therapy. So working as part of kind of a child therapy program. And so I transferred to Dominguez Hills. I was an assistant, and then transferred to Dominguez Hills. Completed my BA. Took me, I think, about 3.5 years to complete my BA. I always say I'm the 3.5 year person. 3.5 years community college, 3.5 years for my BA, then another 3.5 years for my first master's. And along the way, I decided I did a dual major for my BA in English and psychology, and loved both departments. But I decided my master's was going to be in clinical psychology. So I met a man at Dominguez Hills who was teaching. His name is Art Bohart. And he's quite big in the humanistic psychology field. He has done a lot of writing about empathy. And the classes I took with him so resonated with me. It was something about this is who I want to be with the people I work with. I want to be someone who gets as close as possible to the other's experience, which, we never can fully know, but I would work as much as possible to come as close as possible to the other, to try and understand the other's experience. So close boundaries, of course, so that I didn't become just, completely immersed with the other, but close enough that I could feel as much as is human possibly the other's experience. And that would then shape the work that I did. And he wrote about that in such a lovely way. He has been the author of a couple of books and a number of articles, and has written about humanistic psychology and about humanistic psychotherapy. So he was very influential in my life as well. And that was all at California State Dominguez Hills. Then after receiving my first master's, I worked as a social worker in Compton, actually. And boots on the ground, talk about boots on the ground. I loved it. I loved being a social worker, and had a number of foster families and adoptive families that I worked with, along with working a lot with the children and supervising site visits and supervising visits between parents and children. And I really, I grew to love that work, but I also recognized that I was burning out. And the whole time I kept thinking, why is it that the people who are making the decision about these children's lives have never worked in the trenches, have never been, it appeared to me at the time that all of these folks, mostly at the time, it was mostly psychiatrists, gentlemen psychiatrists, who had not had life experience raising children as a single person, or all the concerns, the poverty, et cetera. And I just felt like, again, it's not that I'm power hungry or that I was power hungry, but I just thought, if not me to step into helping to make some of those decisions, then who? Is it left to the people who are going to fast track to get some degree that they learn diagnoses out of a textbook from? Or is it going to be somebody like me who really genuinely wants to sit with somebody and find out how we can best move forward? So lots of thinking, it was lots of self-examination about who do I want to be in the field of psychology. And so I continued my work as a social worker, knew that I was burning out, or that I would. I had seen it happen to a number of my colleagues. My caseload was, outrageous. It's a completely underfunded situation, foster children, and yeah, it's difficult. So I decided, once my children they completed high school and they went off to, life and college. My daughter went to Humboldt State. My son went down to San Diego. And I thought, all right, now's my time. And I applied. I only applied for a couple of programs, PhD programs. And I looked for programs that taught humanistic, transpersonal, existential psychology. So those were the three areas I really wanted to look at. And I ended up at Miami University. And Miami University of Oxford, Ohio, in the middle of Ohio, has had at the time a pluralistic program, and some significant writers in the field of humanistic psychology, dream work, a lot of dream work. I spent a lot of time studying dreams and leading dream groups, and also existential psychology. So I kind of looked for the people and the program that fit for me. I didn't know anything about Saybrook or Sofia or any schools like that. I can't say that I took the time to do a really significant search. And then there was some also, Art Bohart had recommended a couple of people to me. Robert Elliott was one, and he was at a school in Colorado at Toledo. Psychotherapy researcher. He's done a lot of work, and I did develop some partnerships with him. We put some programs together, but I was very interested in James Hillman's work, and Roger Knudsen, who was at Miami of Ohio, had worked with James extensively. And so I put together a number of mini conferences and workshops where James would come and do work, and for the students at Miami of Ohio. It seemed in so many ways to be the perfect place for me. And it was a little more traditional than I might, that I'm, having gone through it now, I would probably pick a little bit less traditional school. But I have to say, I received amazing experiences in research. I had some fantastic field work. My practicums included community mental health in Indiana and Ohio. I also worked for hospitals. And I'm trying to think everything I did. Oh, I was a consultant for Head Start, where I went out to all the Head Starts in Ohio and did assessments, and worked with teachers and children around issues where there were, issues in the classroom. And that was fantastic. And I know I'm missing so many, but it was just amazing practicum experience. And again, I loved it. And I tended to be a kid in a candy store at Ohio, and that I took, again, a lot more classes that I didn't necessarily need, but I wanted. Primarily, I worked with my thesis chair was a man called Larry Leitner, who has written a lot about, he calls it personal construct psychotherapy. And again, it speaks to that empathy, where you're moving as close to the other as possible and sitting with them through their experience. And he talked about just a lot about relationships that I thought was so important. And so he was my thesis advisor, and my thesis was on a case of therapy that I had done for a couple of years with a young woman who experienced internal multiplicity. And I looked at it through that relational lens. And it was wonderful. I thought it was, it was a great experience for me. I then went on to my dissertation, and I chose a different advisor at that point. I was working also with Bill Stiles, who is internationally known for psychotherapy research, and William B. Stiles, and he and I worked on a model of change. It's a model of change that he has developed, and we applied it to this same client that I worked with. And someday, if I meet you at I hope at a intensive or a seminar, or maybe virtually now, I would love to present on my case of 4 years of therapy with this young woman. She's given me full permission. She was involved in all of the writing. Everything I wrote, I gave to her, and she read and gave feedback on. I include her artwork. We talked about how 4 years of therapy, how she went from being a very kind of internally fragmented person and failing school. She was in high school, failing school, and not able to maintain any relationships, experiencing a lot of PTSD. And she talks about how that was who she was coming in, not knowing who she was, completely fragmented, hearing multiple voices, to then by the time therapy ended, it's not that she was healed or that she should have been healed. It was more that she learned how to, Travis, build bridges between the parts of the self. And she was able then to know the parts of her in a way that perhaps you and I might know the different parts of ourself. It felt much more calm to her. And she was able to say, okay, I need a more confident part of me to step forward. I need a more, some people would have diagnosed this dissociative identity disorder. And I'm again, you should know that I kind of am against I'm against diagnoses, psychiatric diagnoses, because most of me is against it. There is a part of me, I'm going to say, that is for them, but most of me is against that diagnostic book for sure. And that we put people in boxes and label them, and it's all about fitting criteria. And I just think it's not who I am or how I approach folks. But what I will say is that for her, and for many of my clients since then that wanted a diagnosis, that for them, it made a huge difference once they had the diagnosis. And I've always thought a lot about that, like why does it make more of a difference to someone to have a diagnosis? Often it's very practical. It then allows them to receive more treatment. That's sad that our system is set up that way, but that's a very practical way of explaining it. And then for her, she felt like, I'm not alone. She finally realized, hey, it's not me. It's not just me being crazy. It's that there's actually a book out there that says this happens to other people. And somehow for her, that so resonated that she felt much better having a diagnosis. I put it off as long as possible, and she pushed it towards the end of treatment to really have that diagnosis. By then, I hope that she had made enough sense, personal sense and meaning of her life, that it wasn't the defining thing. She ended therapy when I left Ohio. She ended therapy and she chose another therapist. We did an amazing transition session. And she was feeling, she had a relationship, she was continuing on at school, she was successful at a job. All of the behavioral indicators demonstrated significant improvement. But the most important thing is that she said she improved dramatically. And she wrote me a number of letters and made me a scrapbook and showed how she had changed and grown. So that's a little bit about my psychotherapy work, just at that in my dissertation level. But that was just an amazing experience for me. And it was qualitative study. I'm not a quantitative researcher. I appreciate data. It's just not the way my brain works. So hearing her story and being a part of her story of change and transformation only, and led me to wanting to do more therapy, obviously, and being more involved in that process. I ended up my internship. I came to Napa. That's how I first came to Napa, to work at Napa State Hospital. And Napa State Hospital has an APA-approved internship program, and it has over 1,000 to 2,000, depending on the time, patients here. Well, they're not patients. I hate to call them that. They call them patients, and they are folks found not guilty by reason of insanity or incompetent to stand trial. And then they also have folks who are just considered so severely mentally ill that they can't live in the community. So it's an institution with a history, some good history, some really good history, and a lot of really negative history, as many institutions in America and elsewhere have been. The way we've treated those folks who are different than the norm has been quite traumatic. And part of me didn't want to be a part of that in some ways, but the other part of me wanted to sit with people who are receiving these kinds of treatments and receiving this level of treatment in America, and be able to provide them a humanistic way of being that they may never have received elsewhere, otherwise. So I was there in my internship year for a year, had a really fantastic experience seeing clients and working on the units. I worked on a geriatric unit for half the year, which was a lot of end of life. And how do you make meaning? This is the existential question. How do you make meaning when first of all, each day you're pretty much locked up, though it's less severely locked up than a prison, but still, how do you make meaning out of that? And then also, how do you make meaning out of that experience when you know that you're now aging out and that you're in your late 60s and 70s and having lots of health issues and death seems to be approaching. So for me, that was a gift to be able to sit with folks in this way and work through some of those things. We did a lot of, group therapy and psychoeducational stuff as required by the organization. And also I was able to do lots of individual therapy. So that was a wonderful experience. I then worked on a unit that was not guilty by reason of insanity. So that's that NGIF. Yeah, I had to think for a sec. Yes. And that was fascinating. And I had some folks who had committed horrific crimes during periods of psychosis or just in other moments of being in a really dark place. And I probably learned more from them than they learned from me, I have to say. I ended up leaving that internship, but then after a couple of years, I was hired back, and I was back at Napa State Hospital for about 4 years. While there, I will say that my area of specialty began to be working with mothers who had murdered their children, often during periods of psychosis, and a number of kind of big cases that went through, the news would end up at Napa State Hospital. Anything in kind of Northern California would end up there. And so it was tough work. I don't want to say that it was fun. I did a lot of play therapy with my clients. I have sand trays and tons of sand tray objects, and I would bring them in, and we did lots of things like that. And it was always interesting to see how somebody made sense of their life. Once, often when a child is murdered, the person is very sick who's involved in that crime. And then And then when they are being treated and they're getting help and they're talking to people about it, they're able to get all that they're holding in out. Suddenly it dawns on them one day, I can't believe I did this to my children who I loved. And the thing I say, it sounds like a movie, Travis says. It is like a movie. But
I said that about your English teacher.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
about the women's study.
Gail Kolsky. Gail Kolsky. Yeah, she was a gift. These women, I will say that very often they were the only ones caring for their children, the only ones buying diapers, the only ones feeding them, the only ones trying to get them into preschool or school. And I worked with one woman who had killed 4 of her 4 children. It was just such a tragedy. And this woman I knew would be released back out into the community at some point, because it often happens over time. It takes a long time, but at some point they often are. And she was the kindest, sweetest person. And in exploring her journey with her children, she was indeed the only one who took care of these children. In fact, when she grew increasingly sicker and sicker and started hearing voices to turn them over to God, in this case, she went 7 times. She sought help in our system, 7 times. And once was turned away because her card had expired. Once was turned away after one night in a homeless shelter. Another time was turned away after a week in a shelter. They were maxed out. Another time she went to the hospital and they released her. This was a woman who was asking for help repeatedly, didn't know how to articulate it the way you or I might, but she was asking in every way she knew how and could find no help, and grew sicker and sicker and sicker in the process. And then horribly, it ended in this tragedy. And of course, in a prison setting or in a hospital, an institutional setting, women who murder their children are often seen at the bottom of the barrel. They are the worst. Very often there's a hierarchy of, who's committed what crime, who's, less sick than the other, unfortunately. And she was able to make great improvement and to continue to work. It was very difficult therapy. And she continued to work after I left the hospital, and she is now out in the community and working at a job and doing as well as anyone could, knowing, you live with that every day. That is also the existential moment. How do I live with this the rest of my life? And I think she has great, courage and bravery. And it was an amazing experience to have worked with her. What I did on the unit that I went on to when I first went on the unit, when I was hired back, it was indeed the most violent unit. It had the most assaults against staff, the most assaults against patient to patient, as they were called, and the most what is it when you bring everything in that's illegal? Contraband. They had the most episodes of being found with contraband, et cetera, on this unit. And so the unit was a mess when I went on it. And I was the psychologist. We had a multidisciplinary team, a psychologist, psychiatrist, a music therapy, art therapist, thankfully. And then of course, nursing staff. A lot of medications being given all the time, I will say. Another tragedy of the system, right? So I went on, the unit was a mess. And I just firmly decided I'm coming on as a humanistic psychologist, and this is what I'm bringing to the table. And I started right away with an open door policy. I had tea bags. I decorated my office with nice things. I had rugs hanging and things on the floor, and they would come in and have tea. I'd have snacks. I would have a line out the door, and part of it was the snacks and tea, but the other part was just being treated human. The first day in, I started calling everyone by Mr. Brown, Miss Brown, because prior to that, there had been lots of kind of name calling. Even the staff sometimes, unfortunately, who were not educated in kind of humanistic or transpersonal ways of being, were calling them, even by the nicknames that had come up, like sticky hands for a man who masturbated all the time. I mean, they were not cruel people, but they didn't understand the power of the word, right? So right away, I started treating everyone with respect, calling them by their names, and And at first, of course, the staff and the clients all thought I was crazy. And I just kept persisting day in and day out. I'd come singing onto the unit. I'd open my door. I'd invite people in. And it was this way of sitting with others that soon people started to respond to. And in fact, I started giving some workshops for the staff, the nursing staff. In the beginning, I stood up to them a lot when they were making some pretty rash decisions about that they were focused on their safety, as opposed more to being, allowing the other to have a voice. And so there was a period of transition, but in 3.5 years, we earned an award for the most for the highest number of reductions of assaults. We had very few assaults. We had very little contraband. And that unit, it wasn't just me. It may have been me that started something rolling, right? It's often one person who starts something rolling, like Gail Kolsky, who convinced me to stay in school. But it was something about everyone else then learning from it and seeing that there are positive results when you treat people in a new way. And soon even the staff that had long been there were dealing with the patients differently. And it wasn't overnight. This was a long haul. I'm not trying to say I was some miracle worker, because I wasn't, but I brought just a little bit of something in that others started to see could work. And the patients, the clients were so much better towards the end. I was able to get individual therapy for a number of them. At the beginning, only 2 on the unit of 42 were receiving therapy. Individual therapy. They always had group therapy, but I was able, by the time I left, 18 were involved in individual therapy. That was the only unit that had that happening. And also we were able to move some people out to a lesser degree of danger therapy, lesser degree of danger in their unit. And then then the next step would be to be transitioned out after they had done their time or resolved their legal issues. So it was talk about transformation of a unit. And it all started with just, me being kind of stubbornly determined to have respect and listen and hear the other. And soon other people learned. I will just share another story of a man I worked with. He came onto the unit, and this man, in reading his file, he had a very normal life. I mean, certainly some ups and downs in it, but a very normal life. And I found out, he came on the unit, he looked shell-shocked. He absolutely looked kind of frozen. He could barely respond to people. And the psychiatrist had diagnosed him with schizoaffective disorder. And I kept saying, that's not it. He started coming in for tea, and we started talking. And over the course of a couple of months, I found out that he had actually been there on 9/11. He had witnessed the crumbling. He was right there, a couple blocks away, had witnessed the whole thing. He was doing construction work, witnessed it all, had been one of the people that had walked across the bridge. I'm not sure what bridge they all walked across to. He got home. He never received any treatment or support for that experience. And he saw people falling to their death. And he then, a relationship that had been going well, broke apart. He started drinking a lot more. He ended up moving back to California. He was taking care of his grandmother in San Francisco. His grandmother died. Then his dog died. He couldn't get out of bed. And he then lost the apartment that she'd had for many years. He couldn't bid any more jobs. He lost his work. He was living out of his car. He became homeless in San Francisco. And then his truck got towed, and then he was really, in the streets. And finally, he was able to contact some friends who were sending him a ticket somewhere, to them. They were going to help him. And he became psychotic on the bus that he was on and threatened some folks with a pocket knife. And that then led to him being in prison, in jail for like 7 months. And finally, he had a court date. And he was very sick by then, very depressed, and they found him not guilty by reason of insanity. This man was not schizoaffective. He had PTSD. If you're going to give a diagnosis, he had PTSD and had never been treated. And this is a man who has since told me that he thought he was going to die in the hospital, that he would be there the rest of his life. And knowing the system as I know it now, I believe he would have been. but something about us meeting and talking, and he, by the time he left the hospital, and he did leave the hospital, he was the president of the patients group, right? And he left the hospital. He was able to get all of his legal issues expunged. He was able, based on reports that I was a part of writing, I certainly didn't do all this, he did the work, but other people also believed, he started to be able to articulate what was wrong with them rather than holding it all in. And he left the hospital and he moved to another state. He married a girlfriend that he had years before, not the one that he, that their relationship fell apart, but another one. And he has his own construction business and is doing very well. And every time he comes back to town, we meet for lunch. And he continues to say, you made a difference in my life on my journey. And that's a huge gift, right? I mean, I'm not saying this to brag. I'm honestly saying all this to just applaud all of you and the work that you're doing, whether it's in psychology or business or whatever. But there are ways, we all know this, we touch people's lives and in big ways. So I loved that work. That's my, I know I'm going a mile a minute, but I loved my work as a clinician. At the same time I was at Napa State Hospital, I've always been a teacher at heart too, and I was always teaching. I was teaching at Saybrook University, and Saybrook University is a humanistic psychology, or it was originally humanistic psychology programs, has strong transpersonal bits and pieces too, obviously not as much as Sofia, but an existentialist. Kirk Schneider is a faculty there. Stanley Kritchner, of course, was faculty there in the olden days. And I loved Saybrook, loved teaching there. A position came open. I was encouraged to apply. I applied. I held both jobs for a year because I just didn't know how I could let go of one of them. And I finally decided to invest in myself in the teaching aspect of it. So I remained as a teacher at Saybrook. And eventually there was a position for a provost. And this is where, people came to me and said, you should apply for this position. And I said, oh no, I laughed. I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. I'm a servant. This is the Girl Scout in me. I grew up in Girl Scouts, and I think that was a huge motivator for me to be a servant. And people kept encouraging me. And the person that was there was not someone that we felt was thinking about faculty and students in some of the decisions. That was our opinion. And so I kept saying no for a couple of months. And finally I said, okay, yes, I'm saying yes, I'm going to apply. I went through the application process and the interview process, and was luckily, I guess, chosen to be a provost at Saybrook University. And I found that I could be a part of change in a different way than I was one-on-one with clients. And I grew to love it. And as much as I love therapy, I don't miss it. I guess when I tell the stories, it seems good, and I miss it a tiny bit, but I really don't. What I love is what we're doing right now in education. Saybrook made a move down to Pasadena. Some of you may be aware. And so I knew that I didn't want to do that. I wanted to stay up in Northern California area. I love to travel, but I did want to have my home here. And I said, okay, I'm going to do consulting work. I've had a great run at Marin County Health and Human Services. I've been able to bring a lot of kind of humanistic values and into their policy making and into some of the programs that they run. I worked with APA on accrediting their clinic that they have, their postdoc preparation. And so that's been really exciting. And I could have continued with that. The funny thing is I saw the ad for the provost position at Sofia 2 days before the application was due. And it just, I knew of Sofia. I had actually put together a humanistic conference at Sofia in 2014, right when there was some really significant changes happening at Sofia. I'm sure some of you are aware of. And so I was aware that this place was going through kind of its own chaos and its own reorganization and its own rebuilding. So I knew that, and it was always near and dear to my heart. but when I saw that ad, something, it was like lightning, right? It was just like, okay, apply. And I'm loving what I'm doing. It's not that I don't. I mean, I loved therapy. It's not that I wanted to leave therapy. I wanted to move forward to an opportunity where I thought I had something that was valuable and something I enjoyed, not just this altruistic thing. I mean, clearly I enjoy it. So I went ahead and filled out the application. I heard back right away, like on the next Monday, oh, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And then I went through the interview process, and never did an interview go so well for me. I didn't talk as fast as I am now. I was probably calmer, less anxious. It was just as if all the stars were aligning, that somehow I'm supposed to be at Sofia for this next stage of my professional career. And I don't take that lightly. I take that as a responsibility. I don't think that means that I'm going to come in and do everything to make everyone happy. That's not the case. I'm well aware this is a tough position, and I have to make, tough decisions from time to time. And yet I think, it's that same thing that goes back to wanting to go to grad school, was if it's not me who genuinely cares, like I know my heart and I genuinely care, if it's not me that makes those tough decisions, then is it somebody who doesn't care as much? And I think lots of people care. So I don't own, I'm not the one who owns caring, but I do hope that I come to Sofia with an open heart. I am coming to Sofia, I think, with an open heart. And I hope that I'm self-reflective enough and open enough to feedback. And even when I make the tough decisions that some folks may not like, that my heart will be in the right place, and that I'm weighing, the decisions and doing what I feel I need to do in this job. The provost is head of academics, and that doesn't mean the provost is in the content of what is taught in class. That means the provost needs to put together a system that can deliver you all academics in the way that you deserve, and that will serve you when you leave Sofia. It's not just while you're here now, have a great academic experience. It's when you leave Sofia and you move out into the world and are changing careers or taking your degree to a higher level at your company you're already at, but that you can be proud about what happened here, and that you know that you have more opportunities because you did go to Sofia. So provost for me is really it's a responsibility, it's a joy. Sofia is a gift. I said the other day at a meeting, I said, it's not often in life that you find a job that is a near perfect fit, and nothing's perfect. I always say the good enough mother. I'm the good enough mother, the good enough grandmother, the good enough provost. But I do care deeply about being here, and I want to connect with folks. And I hope that I hope that I'm a part of this next stage of our change, whatever that is, in a positive way.
Wow, Carol.
I can breathe.
Wow, Carol, that was an absolutely wonderful story. Really loved hearing that. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I can certainly see why you initially were not thinking about administration in your career. You have such vivid experiences as a clinician, and just absolutely wonderful. I'm grateful for all of those people and lives that you've had the opportunity to help. I know they needed that, and I just think that's wonderful. Does anyone have any questions for Carol?
Please.
Please.
So I don't have a question. I just have to say thank you. This was a really, really inspiring story, particularly for me. I'm just almost in tears. Thank you for sure.
Thank you for it, I'm so glad it touched you. Sometimes if I'm, you don't know when you tell your story, if it's going to resonate with the folks you're telling it to. And I even asked Travis, I said, well, what would you like me to talk about? So we all have a different story though. We all have a different journey to this point. Your journey to this point at Sofia is huge. Your journey going forward is huge. And you'll be telling your story to people at some point. You may already be doing that. I mean, and we aren't 18 years old, any of us, are we? I mean, I don't think so. No offense to anyone, Travis.
Ed might be 18. Ed might be 19.
Ed, yay, Ed.
18 or 19. Ed's looking super young today.
I love it.
I'd like to say that, one aspect of your story was the driving force behind you ending up here. And I often tell people in my lives, because they're like, how did you end up in a PhD in psychology? And I'm like, just following the road signs, follow that inner something that that guided me to this point. Because like my undergraduate degree is in biology and theatrical design.
Oh, wow.
My master's degree is in film and television studies. So, and I had a 20-year career before I got an itch. Like you were talking about how you were just interested in the psychology. Like I noticed that everything I was doing outside of work was listening to, watching, reading about, consciousness and all of that other stuff. So, and just one thing led to another. And here I am. So, and I would add that I have never felt so at home in my life. Like I took to this whole this branch of psychology like a duck to water. And I'm constantly reading stuff that has been left by people who have long gone. And I ask myself, how did this person come into the future, steal my ideas, go back and write about it? So that's how an alignment I am with it all, because it just all makes it's like second nature to me. I'm like, why doesn't the rest of the world think like this? So anyway, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for telling your story.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad this place fits for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's awesome.
I think when we
Beth,
talk,
Beth, did you have something that you wanted to say as well? I thought, no. Okay, yeah, no worries.
I was thinking when we talk about professional development, or even I guess even beyond that, like our journey, when we think about our career going forward, I think there's some people that, my brother was like this. He made a plan as a child that he wanted to do something. And by gosh, he did it. And he found happiness in that. He knew very early on. I mean, I had a feeling, I had a thought, I had ideas, but I think if I had stuck to a plan, I never would have ended up in administration. And I do know, as much as I feel like I've helped to sit with others as they've made change in their personal lives after tragedy and trauma, I also have sat with students and faculty and staff and an organization that has to make change after periods of trauma. I mean, it's a different kind of trauma, but it's still traumatic. So I just am grateful that somehow I learned to listen and say yes to the next thing, because some people aren't. I don't think some people are able to say yes to something new and interesting and different. And it seems like all of you coming to Sofia have said yes to something new and different and interesting, unique.
Definitely. There's a lot of, thank you, Beth. I think Beth was saying that she had to go, but maybe Carol, check the chat for all the great things that people are saying.
Thank you.
While you're in the story. I took a variety of notes. I do have one question. Could you repeat the humanistic psychologist that studied empathy? What was his name again?
Art Bohart, Bohart. He has a basic counseling book. Oh, let's see. Well, this is an old book, Foundations of Clinical and Counseling Psychology. This was like the textbook for many years of humanistic counseling. And then let's see what else I've got. You all know Kirk Schneider, right? Oh, here's the updated version. That's the old book. That's the updated one. And looking at Yalom, I know he did a book even on evil, which is so fascinating to me. Especially having worked in the prison system, right? In the state hospital system.
I think Yalom is really awesome. The Gift of Therapy is a really incredible book. Beautiful. I think 101 for therapists is a must.
Yes. And he's really facing end of life things in many ways now. Yeah. And it's very interesting, that journey, I think.
Yeah.
and how he's exploring it.
Yeah. So you said like there's incredible insights to be pulled from the story. Different things that resonated with me that I pulled from the story was one thing I resonated with was this feeling of I'm never one to sit in the back of the class, but feeling that I was not good enough to be there, maybe this sort of thing, feeling like I'm just not up to par like I would like to be, but not allowing that or other circumstances in my life to define my situation. I like that you said that you did not allow your experience as a single mother or the choices that you made to define you didn't allow those circumstances to define your situation, but you kept going. I could imagine your kids are just like, yeah, that's mom doing homework again. Mom's always at home doing homework. And that's really inspiring for your children to set like just a really incredible example. I'd love to see more parents in that way. There's a lot of things with that really resonated with me. Also the idea that you were just inspired by these incredible teachers along your journey. I have an experience in community college with an English teacher that she really inspired me, made me feel good about my writing, even if I was not feeling personally good about the writing. There's funny stories there, and I'm sure, like you said, that we all have those sort of experiences. And so then, if not you, somebody who has had experiences, maybe in the trenches, is how you said it, but having personal experiences so that you could be honestly empathic to the people that you're working with, the communities, the different situations that you could put yourself in as an opportunity to help people through their different circumstances. I think that's incredible. Who, if not you, then who would you have somebody that has never had any of these experiences make those sort of decisions? I certainly would not. So a lot of incredible things that I pulled from there. It would take me a little bit to go through those notes, but thank you so much, Carol.
Oh, it's an honor. And thank you for listening to me. I was thinking about this thing about making change, this idea of the change process, which has always intrigued me. Mm-hmm. And making change in a university, making change in our personal lives, those are all journeys, right? And what was I just had a brilliant thought. Sorry. But it was something about making change in a system. Oh, that there are change makers that are people who make change by staying outside of a system, like choosing to stay outside the system and fight and protest and, or however, to move against it. That's how they change. And they're amazing people. And that's a calling that some people have. I don't have that. For some reason, I have the calling, maybe my kind of upbringing, I don't know, but I have the calling to make change from within a system. Mm-hmm. And I think it's okay to be either and to know who you are. And there's probably many other opportunities of making change that I'm not even touching on. But for me, it would have been easy not to keep saying no to Provost. It would be easy for me to not have gone to Napa State Hospital, to not learn the DSM inside and out. It would have been easy not to do those things, but the challenge for me was to work from within the system, and though some days it could be disheartening, other days, it was a pure joy to be able to see somebody, say yes. For example, my client, the female client who desperately wanted that diagnosis. And know that the whole process had been very thoughtful and we had taken time and I had consistently checked in with her about it and did everything I could to make sure she didn't feel labeled by it. That was a gift. And if I hadn't learned the DSM, I couldn't have done that in quite the same way. And I wouldn't have given her what she really felt she needed. Yeah. So as much as I, as I said earlier, I oppose it, I also knew it was important to understand it. I learned a long time ago, not that if I argue against something, I better understand it in order to argue against it. For me, that has worked better.
I mean, that last piece is incredible advice, really good insight for anybody doing critical scholarly work, just in writing, to know the argument really well if you're going to be making an oppositional argument. I do resonate with that idea of being an agent of change from the inside. And those other things that you said about more of a pathologizing paradigm, I have found often whenever, never to clients, never to anybody that I was working with in a clinical fashion, but telling people that you don't that you don't vibe with diagnoses is almost personally destructive to a lot of people that have really chosen that as a strong part of their identity. There is, I understand the value for them personally to know that that this is it colors me in a particularly an identical way, that the way that I see myself, that this maybe the most recent experience with that is attention deficit disorder. If somebody wants to have this diagnosis, to say that it's not my fault that my brain is acting this way, and I think power to them that is, if that is helpful. But I do resonate with this more of a, like, the neurodiversity sort of thoughts in this pathologizing paradigm and all of those things. So that's.
Can I add to that, Travis?
Please, James.
Well, yeah. So, we can get stuck in our stories, and it's, if you have a story, like if you've gotten a diagnosis that allows you to not do the work, you can get really good at that. Like for me, my own personal situation was that I left high school in my 10th year, and my highest grade was a 40. So basically I had a 9th grade education, and I wandered for 15 years before I got a GED and took on the undergraduate degree. And you know why? Because I was told that you have a learning disability in the area of written language, which I do, right? And you're not gonna fix it. So why even try?
Yeah.
So, and I lived with that for a very long time, until I said, what am I doing?
Right.
I'm preventing myself from doing all the stuff that I really want to do because of this thing that I learned to overcome. So
yeah. I wrote this note down from Carol speaking, not allowing that diagnosis to define you. She mentioned that that client that felt good about the diagnoses, that she mentioned that their work together would have given her enough self-definition that she did not allow that diagnosis to be the defining factor. And that's incredible.
It can be one piece of the puzzle, right? It doesn't have to be the whole puzzle.
Right.
And I think, but I feel like if we had diagnosed her, of course she was too young. She was just at the end of high school. So legally she was too young to diagnose. But if we had jumped to that immediately, which I fear if she had gone to someone who was trained in that way would have occurred. If we had given her that diagnosis, I feel like she wouldn't have learned all of these other things about herself first. So for me, it was being thoughtful and careful and resistant. I was resistant in the beginning, and my supervisor wanted to diagnose as soon as she was 18. And I was so resistant. Let's just hold off. Let's keep waiting. And maybe my supervisor listened because I was a little older, and I'd been a social worker. I fear that if it's someone who hasn't had some life experience and they're trying to stand up in that way, it maybe not have been heard. All things fell together, I believe. And it's not to say that everything was perfect in our therapy session. I found the book. I was sitting my computer on it that I was going to show you. It's called Empathy Reconsidered. This is by, it's a lot of research about empathy that he brings together. This is edited by Art Bohart. I highly recommend it. There's also a woman, I'm going to find the name of it, Connie something, and she wrote a book about diagnosis and how the whole way to diagnose is to have the client be involved in it through the whole process. And to and even when you're sitting with someone and you have to give a diagnosis, and if you're in a system that requires that you sit with the book with the client and you actually go through it and you say, does this feel like it makes sense to you? Is this kind of, can you tell me an example, or what do you think? Does this resonate for you? Rather than that prescriptive bit of just handing them the diagnosis, because unfortunately, a lot of the work that we have to do in the real world, once we leave a school like Sofia or Saybrook, or even Miami, is going to require us to diagnose if we're in the clinical world. You will find the unique little community center that doesn't require that, but most places do. I was going to mention something about my children. I think that it was a great model for them, but I'll tell you, I think there's pros and cons to, I always say there's light and dark to everything. And the dark side of me, like I would take my kids and we were in Southern California, so we'd go to the beach, and my son was into surfing, and he'd take the surfboard and I'd sit on the sand and I'd do my homework, do statistics, right? And one time I took my daughter and her friends to a Grateful Dead concert in San Francisco, and I was in a horrible hotel room doing statistics. That was my bane of my existence. And while they were at the concert. So on the one hand, it's like a great example, but I have to tell you that my kids, who are adults now, will look back and say that, it wasn't all that great for them sometimes. And so everything is a choice, right? I mean, they have their struggles with mom, who had her head in a computer and a book a lot. I don't know that, I don't want to pretend that that's perfect. There is a good example, and also I probably should have let it go a bit more. But we just do the best we can, right, Tracy? I'm with you.
Yeah, that's really great. I like I'm sorry that you missed out on that Grateful Dead concert.
I know. And I was in a hotel room that looked like it didn't have a screen on the window, and it was the worst possible. It was like one that people commit suicide from. It was horrible. I'll never forget that. I don't know what I was thinking.
I love I would really appreciate knowing the author to that book. You mentioned clients being involved in the process of diagnoses. I think that's really great. This neurodiversity language and paradigm around diagnosis is really helpful as well. We had an adjunct faculty member at Sofia University in the bachelor's completion program, a teacher of mine, and his name is Dr. Nick. His name is Dr. Nick Walker, and he has a website that he recently changed the name of it, but it hosts his writing. It's now neuroqueer.com. It's
Yes.
easier to spell than neurocosmopolitanism.com, which was the previous title. So I'm glad for that. But neuroqueer.com, really recommended for the conversation around diagnoses and neurodiversity, things like this. I think that another piece for your whole talk is that being that agent of change, that we all have this unique service to bring to all these different environments, and with this niche transpersonal psychology thing, you're going to have an incredibly unique opportunity and thing to bring to an environment that really needs healing, that really needs maybe that needs to think outside the box a little bit. So it's incredible everything that you are bringing to Sofia University, and thanks for being here with the Transpersonal Student Community. I hope we're all inspired by Carol's talk today. Does anybody else have any?
Yeah, please feel free to email me, or if you have a question, if something comes up. In the same way that I had an open door on the unit at Napa State Hospital, not to say that you're like Napa State Hospital, but I do want to have an open door as much as possible. And I know there will be days I won't be able to respond immediately, but I I do want you to know that that I am genuine in my intent to be connected as much as humanly possible in this role, with also allowing myself a work-life balance, which is what I would suggest for all of you, right? More and more we're talking about work-life balance and taking care of ourselves.
I love that. I definitely resonate with being open email, open contact for anybody in this community, in this field. I just put Carol's email in the chat. So carol.humphreys@sophia.edu. So everybody, Sofia University, alumni, et cetera, feel free to reach out. And thank you. I think that's it for us today.